participation in today's Swadhyay Sahachakra Weekly Forum Dialogue. And we have titled this dialogue as Walking and Meditating with Jimmy Carter, who is no more, and he he is a kind of he has been a kind of leader uh, of global leader, I would say, who has a long established career as a politician, as a diplomat, and he has a deep quest of peace building process, um, and um, and he has part of many important initiative of peace building process. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002 for his decades of untiring efforts to find peaceful solutions to international conflict, to advance democracy, to advance human rights, and promote social empowerment and social development. We are joined by two of our speakers. I extend a very warm welcome to Professor David Black-Wills from USA. I extend a very warm welcome to Professor Anand Giri and all friends co-present here, Gyan Glory, Menti Pradhanji, Professor Mohanty. Professor David Black is a professor of anthropology and education at Fielding Graduate University and professor of emeritus of anthropology or sociology at Shoi Buddhist University, Japan. He taught and did very deep research at the University of Oxford and was visiting professor at Gardner College and University of Washington. He is part of many peace building initiatives, a global peace building initiative. He is quite aware of Ekta Parishad social movement in India and abroad. So thank you, Professor David, for accepting our invitation to share your thought on Jamie Gardner. So I would request Anantabhai to initiate presentation and followed by Professor David.
Thank you, Ranveer, and thank you, David, and friends co-present. Ranveer, could you please put my sent PPT?
Okay, so let me just give me 20 seconds. Okay, done.
Could you enlarge it a bit? Is possible? No problem. Then I will look at this screen here. So, dear friends, today our conversation, walking and meditating with Jimmy Carter, his many-sided life, as Ranveer has just offered a little bit of glimpse to his uh, creative life for a century. Beginning with the next slide, Ranveer, if you can come. Religion, public morality, and hope for a new political term. President Carter came to office in 1976. And he came to office, he ran uh, as a peanut, he joined politics. He had joined the US Navy, and then he joined politics. He was the governor of Georgia, and then he ran for the president. And at that time, American society was going through a very fundamental crisis, as to some extent paralleling the contemporary moment. And for example, President Nixon and Watergate, and people's search for a new political morality. And President Carter offered a sense of uh, different public life. And he was somebody who grew up as a religious person, but he was not an quote unquote a closed evangelist. And his religiosity was very open, it was practical, as different from the influential evangelicals of the time, such as Jerry Falwell. As religion and politics has been very important in American politics. And I remember President Carter writing about his visit to Israel. And even before he was the president, and he discusses his discussion with then Prime Minister of Israel, Golda Meir. And President Carter asks Prime Minister Golda Meir, "Oh, what is the relationship between religion and politics in Israel?" And Prime Minister Golda Meir says, "Oh no, we are a few Orthodox Jews," and then because at that time it was mainly secular politics, the left-leaning politics. But suddenly things turned, and then President Carter himself, as the president, he nurtured the Camp David Agreement. It was a great milestone, towards peace, but that also was a very difficult journey. And the effort towards peace has been betrayed, as President Carter wrote about another important book in 2006 called Palestine, Peace or Apartheid. But engaging with the challenge of religion and politics in American politics, we see how critical it has been in the last at least 2 decades, and especially 10 years ago with the election of President-elect, then President Donald Trump, and now President-elect, and how some of the critical issues like abortion rights and others, and how it has been very influential in American politics. So as we walk and meditate with Jimmy Carter, we embrace the challenge of thinking about a different relationship between religion and politics, which President Carter cultivated, and now President and President-elect Trump, in his case, it is very different. But President Carter shows us a different relationship between religion and politics, and not just part of a closed religious fundamentalism. Next slide, please. Then, as part of his public spirituality and public commitment as a citizen, when President Carter left office, he says that a citizen is as important, even more important, as the president. So he really demonstrated from 1918 to 2025 how many years it is. So in these years, these 45 years, he has embodied the creative power of citizens, working not only in American society, but also transnationally. President Carter was born in a place in Georgia called Plains, Georgia. And near that community had grown up a very important, just hang on for a moment, the previous slide onto this one. So near Plains, Georgia is a place called Americus, Georgia, just maybe 15, 20 kilometers. And there had grown up a very important movement in religion and spirituality called Koinonia Farm. Koinonia, drawing from the Greek word community. And that was established by a pastor named Clarence Jordan. It was around mid 1940. So Clarence Jordan read the New Testament in Greek, and then he translated the New Testament into the Southern diction. For example, Jericho and Jerusalem became Atlanta and Macon, Georgia. And it is in that community after 20 years, another person joined. His name is Millard Fuller, who had become a millionaire at a young age of 30. And he and his wife, Linda Fuller, faced some challenges in their marriage because of Millard Fuller's one-sided devotion to profit and money making. And Linda was about to leave him. And when they decided, they got to hear about Clarence Jordan and Koinonia Farm, and they came down and they stayed in this community. And there around 1965, they initiated a project called Habitat for Humanity. Now they began by building houses for the sharecropping families who are working in Koinonia Park, the laborers. So it was a housing project for the laborers. Most of them are African Americans, blacks. And this was accompanied by a lot of discrimination and violence. But Clarence Jordan, he employed both blacks and whites in his community. So Millard Fuller worked in this place, and then in 1976, he founded Habitat for Humanity International. And after leaving the White House in 1980, President Carter became a volunteer with this movement. For example, he started building a house. One of the notable work that he did was building houses in Bronx, New York, and around the world. He had also come to Bombay, and Bombay has a special place in President Carter's life because his mother had worked as a nurse in Bombay. So he built houses with low-income families as a volunteer of Habitat for Humanity in many communities in USA as well as in some parts of the world. Then the Carter Center that he founded, I visited Carter Center in 1986, or let us say early 1987, when I was visiting Atlanta in the first winter of my stay in the USA. So I visited Carter Center, and Carter Center also has undertaken many important works in peace building, but also disease control, especially in Africa. For example, Carter Center has been singularly responsible for eradication of the Guinea worm disease. As the center writes, since 1986, the Carter Center has led international campaign to eradicate Guinea worm disease, working closely with ministries of health and local communities, the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and many others. Guinea worm disease could become the second human disease in history after smallpox to be eradicated. It would be the first parasitic disease to be eradicated and the first disease to be eradicated with the use of a vaccine or medicine. Then the next slide, please. Then we come to his peace work, beginning with Camp David and then in many other parts. And his book, Palestine, Peace or Apartheid, which as can be expected, was subjected to a lot of critique and attack by the, the Zionist apologists of Israel, as well as the Israeli lobby in American politics, to the extent that even when Senator Barack Obama was, fighting to be president, and in that convention, President Jimmy Carter was not invited to speak because of his stance on Israel. In this book, Carter makes it very clear that Israel is to blame for the lion's shares of the problem facing both Palestinians and Israel vis-a-vis the illegal Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories. And in Israel's continued settlement building that is stealing more and more land and resources, particularly water. And some of the quotes from this book is each Israeli settler uses 5 times as much water as a Palestinian neighbor who must pay 4 times as much per gallon. Benjamin Netanyahu promised never to exchange land for peace. The greatest increase in the growth of the number of settlers occurred during the administration of Prime Minister Ehud Barak. This is the Prime Minister who supposedly made the generous offer that the Palestinians supposedly refused. There was no possibility that any Palestinian leader could accept such terms, such as Clinton's peace proposal in 2000 survived. But official statements from Washington and Jerusalem were successful in placing the entire onus of the failure on Yasser Arafat. And we see that how the challenge continues. Carter has written quite extensively on faith, religion, his autobiography, and some of the books are The Blood of Abraham, Insights into the Middle East, Carter and Rosalind Carter, Everything to Gain, Making Most of the Rest of Your Life, Jimmy Carter, Turning Point, A Candidate, a State, and a Nation Come of Age, an outdoor journal, Adventures and Reflections, Talking Peace, a vision for the next generation, Always Reckoning, and other poems. How nice that we discover or we realize a kindred spirit of Jimmy Carter as a poet. Then the little baby snuggle pleasure, living faith, sources of strength, the virtues of aging, and a few more like Christmas in Plains, Memories, then the Nobel Peace Prize lecture in 2002, The Honest Ness, a novel of the Revolutionary War, Sharing Good Times, Our Endangered Values, Faith and Freedom, given our engagement with faith in our recent hybrid seminars, for which Professor Willis had given the keynote, engaging with Carter's work on faith would be deeply significant. Then Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, Leading a Worthy Life, Sunday Mornings in Plains, Measuring our Success Beyond the White House, and Why Not Be the Best? These are his early works. A Government as Good as Its People, then Keeping Faith again, Negotiation, the Alternative to Hostility, An Hour Before Daylight, Memories of a Rural Boyhood, A Remarkable Mother, We Can Have Peace in the Holy Land, a plan that will work. So as he, after White House, he stayed in Plains, Georgia. And I first met President Carter in January 1987 as I mentioned, I came to Atlanta, and I was staying in the house of a pastor there. And he asked me, okay, you are studying anthropology. What would you like to study? I said that I am not interested to go back to India and I want to study something American. But I told him I do not want to describe American cultural habits like how they date or how they eat. I am interested in social change and transformation. Then he told me, you have only two options. I said, okay, what is that? You can study Ku Klux Klan or Habitat for Humanity. So that was the morning. It was like a little awakening on my. I asked, what is Habitat for Humanity? He said, do not know. No, I do not know. Then he told me it's a 3 hours bus journey from Atlanta. So next morning, I took a bus from Atlanta to Americus, Georgia. So connected the Kononia farms, came to stay there for a week. And my friends dropped me to the church in Plains, Georgia, where every Sunday, President Carter comes, he sits in the church. He does not speak. And then after the church, he leads the Sunday Bible study program. And so I joined him, I met him. And then a few years later, in 2009, when our daughter was born, so we came and we were there and we came and he and Rosalind Carter held our daughter in their hands. So this is a little, journey with President Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter. So in our very difficult times today, so walking and meditating with Jimmy Carter offers us possibility of a new kind of knowledge, a new faith, a new politics, and possibilities of still trying to make a difference in our challenged world. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Ananta Bhai, as usual. Very inviting presentation. Uh, Now I request Professor David to share his reflection.
Namaskar, namaste, salam alaikum, Jai Bim. Hello to everyone. Konbanwa from Japan. I'm in Yao, Osaka, Japan right now. We live much of the year in California, but also part of the year here. We're also part of the year in India, and part of the year in Switzerland, where my younger son lives. Very touching stories, Anantabai, really very special stories about your experiences getting to meet Jimmy Carter. This is not unusual to hear this kind of story about Jimmy Carter. I have a number of friends who have similar stories about meeting this very humble man. He was very prideful too. He was a very proud man because he was very smart and very successful in many different ways. The media portrayed him in certain ways, which I'll talk about a bit today. I think this is important to note the public image at the time when he was president and at the end of his presidency, and then the public image that continued for many years. Turns out that it was rather incorrect compared to what he had actually accomplished. And the idea that we can walk and meditate with Jimmy Carter is one that is filling the world right now in many places. He was very humbly born in basically a village in Georgia. Plains, Georgia is in India certainly would be called a village. And he was a born-again Christian. He was an evangelical. He came on the scene in the United States politically like a meteor. It was really quite stunning how he became president. We had the years 1960 through 1975 were a really terrible time for the United States, we had the assassinations of presidents and their brothers, and Martin Luther King Jr., the great leader, also assassinated. Malcolm X, a great leader, assassinated. Vietnam War was happening, the civil rights movement, terrible uprisings in the cities. The white media likes to call them riots. I prefer the interpretation that my black friends call it, the uprisings. Uh, and these are very much in spirit with Jimmy Carter, who fought against apartheid all of his life. And I think it's important to notice that apartheid does not just exist, has not just existed in South Africa, but has also existed in many other places. Certainly, the United States South was a place and is a place still in many ways of apartheid. Not nearly as severe as it was, at the time that President Carter was growing up and all, but his family employed black folks and they were very close with them. And of course, the apartheid of Israel and Palestine, the apartheid that has happened there. And then we have, of course, another apartheid, the worst apartheid in the world right now, to my mind, which is the caste system in India. Something for another time to speak about, certainly. Ananta, you were so lucky that you got to spend this time with Jimmy Carter and his choice to you. You can study the KKK or Habitat for Humanity. I'm glad that you studied Habitat for Humanity. It would have been dangerous to study the KKK, even back then in the 1980s when you were speaking about it. It's very important to understand the role of the media in how Jimmy Carter has been portrayed, as I was mentioning, and his manner of communication as well. Sometimes, if we think about Mahatma Gandhi, 100 years ago, Mahatma Gandhi was very much disparaged in the Western media. They talked about Mahatma Gandhi as the naked fakir, as this troublemaker and all that. And of course, the contributions of Gandhiji, we all know very well in our group here. And President Carter is similar, I think, in many ways to Mahatma Gandhi. And in terms of the works, the good works that he has done throughout his life. Thank you for putting that up, that picture. Here's the funeral, of course. That's not to say that he didn't have his faults, and I'll mention a few of those as well. But I want to put his presidency in the context of America having had a very terrible time between 1960 and 1975. Basically, the United States lost the war in Vietnam to this small country of North Vietnam, and it gave rise in the United States to terrific feelings of depression and so on. Here we are, the great country that's going to lead the world. Well, of course, there are other aspects of the history of the United States, including the imperialism of the United States. We seem to be revisiting that a little bit right now with the person who's going to be the next president, the returning to the presidency. I'm very interested in the ideas of Jimmy Carter along the lines of religion, politics, and the challenges of different kinds of transformations. Jimmy, I'll give you a few thoughts on Jimmy Carter, and I'm sharing these thoughts from a number of sources too. I'll give you some idea about those sources in a minute. I think the key words for Jimmy Carter were do the right thing. Do the right thing, to have not only righteous thought, but righteous behavior. And it is not enough to say how wonderful Jesus is and how great God is and so on. You need to show it with your good works as well. And of course, he did that in many, many different ways through the years. I'd like to share from my side, if I could, Randir, just a quick, if you could give me permission to share just a quick photograph also of Jimmy Carter. Thank you. You're admitting. Okay, I'm supposed to admit. Okay. There we go. Many pictures of Jimmy Carter are like this one, very thoughtful man. And he lost the presidential election to Ronald Reagan in 1980. However, this was an election which had been interfered with behind the scenes by some of Ronald Reagan's folks. They had gone to the Ayatollah Khomeini's people from Iran who had kidnapped American diplomats, and these diplomats were held for more than 400 days, maybe 445 days, I think it was, after the Iranian Revolution. And of course, it's important to note that the leader that they overthrew, the Shah of Iran, was really quite an evil person in many different ways. He had an intelligence network of spies called the Savak, and they were doing terrible things to the Iranian people. I visited Iran during the Shah of Iran's rule. I have friends who lived there in Iran during that time, and it was very much a police state supported by the United States. And when the Shah was deposed, when he was thrown out, and the Ayatollah Khomeini came from Paris back to Iran, the Shah needed a place to go, and Jimmy Carter refused to admit him into the U.S. He had a lot of pressure from many people. Finally, after all this pressure, he said, okay, the Shah can come to the U.S. And that is when the American diplomats were kidnapped. And Carter had a sense that this was going to happen. And of course, he lost the presidency because of a secret deal that was made by Reagan's people. And right after Ronald Reagan was elected, those diplomats were all released. They were all let go. So it was a rather dirty deal. And we are aware of that story very much now. We know the story now. It's important to note, I think, with media and particularly with social media these days, that what we see and consume may not be accurate. And in fact, there's a high likelihood it's not accurate. So we have to very critically look at sources that are out there. So I'll stop my share for a minute, and thank you for all of you who have joined us here. I'm giving a few thoughts about Jimmy Carter, the 39th U.S. president who passed away at 100 years of age at the end of December last year. He was very much a departure from the norm for American presidents. And the historians tend to think of him as kind of in the middle in terms of a reputation as a president. However, we are now realizing that he was much more of a president, a much better president than we thought at the time. I'll be giving you a few comments here now from some of the writers for the Guardian newspaper, the New York Times, Maureen Dowd being one of them. And especially my comments are going to be drawing on the work of Kai Bird, K-A-I, Bird. Kai Bird is the author of the best biography on Jimmy Carter, titled The Outlier, The Unfinished Presidency of Jimmy Carter. So Carter was very depressed when he lost the presidential election to Ronald Reagan. However, he decided after being depressed for some time, now enough of this depression, I have work to do. And part of that work is what Ananta was sharing with you before about the Habitat for Humanity. Kai Bird, the biographer and author of the book, The Outlier on Jimmy Carter, is also the author of Oppenheimer, and the movie Oppenheimer was based on Kai Bird's book. Kai is a friend of mine, and Kai went to Kodaikanal School in South India. Those of you who know about Cody School, Kai Bird is a graduate of that school. Jimmy Carter is now, I think, considered one of America's greatest ex-presidents. He used his star power of having been president to champion peace in many different ways. Of course, he received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. The uh, uh, Camp David Accords. Camp David is the place where the presidents go to for their retreat up in the mountains near Washington when they want to take a break. He invited the top diplomats from Israel and Palestine to come there, and they forged an agreement. I'm sorry, between Egypt and Israel, and they forged an agreement of peace, and that agreement has held. Egypt and Israel have been at peace since that time. And Jimmy Carter was a human rights champion in many different ways. He monitored free elections as well. And his work with Habitat for Humanity really is about homelessness and his advocacy for the homeless. Uh, Much of this, of course, comes from his traditional religious values. And he's been portrayed, as I said earlier, as a rather middle of the road president, but increasingly we're seeing him as one of the great presidents. Uh, and for many years, his rule was regarded as a political failure. He gave a speech in which he said, "We have to do something about our country." And I feel this sense of malaise in the country. And of course, didn't lift the nation's spirits, but plunged the nation into some despair. What he really was talking about was we need to stop focusing all the time on consumerism and all of these things. Um, and he's a misunderstood president. He's a very misunderstood president. And as Kai Bird says, he always just wanted to do the right thing. So he was an outlier. He was a very unusual kind of politician. And for the people in the South, he felt a little bit too much like a Yankee. And for the people in the North, he felt a little bit too much like, an evangelical populace. Um, but it's been 43 years since he was president. And what he did after that was really been quite astonishing. He trained as an engineer, and he was also a farmer. He also was the commander of a nuclear submarine, and that, of course, is not an easy job to be the captain of a nuclear submarine. Very disciplined person. He would get up early in the morning and go right to work. Very solid values. And this is a great contrast to the person who will become president in a few weeks. Um, Jimmy Carter once saved many people when, like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible, he disarmed a nuclear reactor that was about to explode. In 1952, he was lowered into the nuclear reactor at a risk of meltdown, and he had exactly 90 seconds to avert the disaster. He completed the job with a single second to spare. Uh, I would think that this would mean that he would be in the history books for a long time to come. But who is behind the writing of the history books? Who is behind the media? Again, we need to have a critical eye on all of these things. In fact, during Carter's era, more major items of legislation were passed than in Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, or George W. Bush's 8 years. So Carter was in for 4 years. He was able to get more legislation passed than these other presidents who were presidents for 8 years. He was also very involved with environmental policy and was, in many ways, one of the first world leaders to identify climate change as a problem. He introduced fuel economy standards for automobiles. At the time, American automobiles would consume an enormous amount of gasoline. And he also put solar panels on the roof of the White House. And these were later removed by Ronald Reagan. But then a later president, I think it was probably Bill Clinton, put the solar panels back. And he doubled the size of the American National Park System. But really, I think the Camp David Accord, peace accord between Israel and Egypt is probably his most significant achievement. He also opened the relations with China. Nixon had started that, had opened the door, but the formal recognition of China came under Carter. And of course, the US-China relationship has been an underpinning of the global economy since that time. He also arranged arms control agreements with the Soviet Union. And this, of course, pushed us away from nuclear standoffs with the Soviet Union and so on. So there was a lot of achievement that Carter had at the time, but the media didn't care for him. He didn't have the kind of shiny, smiley face of a Ronald Reagan. He was a thoughtful person, and perhaps too thoughtful for some of the Americans, for many Americans. However, after his passing here at the end of last month, there has been just a great outpouring of articles and so on about all the things that he has done. And of course, he established the Carter Center, as Ananta alluded to. And this is a very important, very respected human rights and anti-poverty center for the world, a great emphasis on peace. And Jimmy Carter was involved with the Carter Center for many, many years. So his life offers lots of lessons, especially, I think, for peace workers, especially for peace workers. Kai Bird said that when he was regularly interviewing Jimmy Carter a few years ago, Carter was in his early 90s, and yet he was still rising at dawn and getting to work early. Kai says, I once saw him conduct a meeting at 7 a.m. at the Carter Center, where he spent 40 minutes pacing back and forth on stage, explaining the details of his program to wipe out guinea worm disease. He was relentless. Later that day, he gave me, his biographer, exactly 50 minutes to talk about his White House years. Those bright blue eyes bore into me with an alarming intensity, but he was clearly more interested in the guinea worms. And this is an absolutely horrible disease. If you don't know about it, please read about it. I put a link in the chat. So again, he's a very misunderstood president in many ways. He also declared when he became Georgia's governor in 1971 that the time for racial discrimination is over. And this, of course, when you're faced with Southerners, many of whom are extremely racist, was really quite a courageous thing to say back at that time. And he won the White House in 1976 to everyone's surprise. And he decided, as Kai Bird says, to use his power righteously, ignoring politics and doing the right thing. And it was better to be active and do something rather than to make speeches about something and not do something. So again, the SALT II arms control agreement, the Camp David peace accords, very important. He also deregulated the airline industry. So previous to that, only people who were rather rich could afford to fly. Now, with the deregulation of the airline industry, many people could. He also deregulated natural gas. He also worked to require seat belts and airbags in cars. And he expanded the American national parks, especially in Alaska, by a huge amount. And he appointed many African Americans, Hispanics, and women to the federal judgeships. That's another thing that he did. And he kept trying to get peace in the Middle East. And of course, that eluded him in many, many different ways. But he thought that diplomacy would work. This was one of his main values, looking at diplomacy. And the majority of the country rejected him as a president. He was perhaps way ahead of his time. He was way ahead of his time, it feels like, in many ways. And yet now we're beginning to realize how important he was, how important he really was with his discipline and his integrity and his very much rock solid values that he had. When he took the oath of office, he jumped out of the limousine and he walked the rest of the way to the White House. And he would wear cardigan sweaters, which is a symbol of kind of just middle class dad sitting around the fire with his kids. We were surprised about that too. One other achievement was to give Panama sovereignty over the Panama Canal. And that's, of course, come back in the news now with the person who's going to be president next saying we should have the canal again. So again, imperialist legacy coming up here in some ways. And really, this is what he was speaking about when he gave his Malaise speech, which became so infamous, is the crisis that strikes at the heart and soul, spirit of the nation, and thinking about, well, we can do better than this, than simply sitting back and consuming things. And he took many risks. Also, I'm going to share one other photograph here. This is really a remarkable photograph. At the funeral a few days ago, this is a photograph of the former presidents at his funeral a few days ago. Even Trump is there with his wife. You can see he's there together with Obama. Kamala Harris and her husband Doug are here, the current vice president. Current president Joe Biden and his wife Jill are here. Of course, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, George H.W. Bush and his wife Laura, and Al Gore, who was the vice president, of course, under Clinton, and then Pence, who was the vice president under Trump, and Pence's wife, Karen Pence. It's a remarkable tribute that all of these people came, and there were many other international leaders who came also to the funeral at this time. Just a few more thoughts from my side here. So that was quite an extraordinary gathering of those people. And here it was, the contrast was very great too. As Maureen Dowd said, on the one hand, you had Carter, who was, it was his funeral and everyone is honoring him, and a very righteous person. And then you have Donald Trump, who has been convicted of felonies and all, even though he's going to become president again. And Carter, of course, had a passion for honesty. He would say, I will never lie to you. Trump, of course, has, every time he speaks, there are many lies. So, and we have a good record for that. And, whereas Trump has been getting the support of many of the right-wing Christians, Carter was a true Christian in many different ways. And there is a group of folks that are supporting Trump. Let me share that in the chat with you as well, who are called the New Apostolic Reformation Christians. And this is a very dangerous group. In many ways, they are the shock troops for Trump. This is an article in the Atlantic magazine that just came this last week. Really recommend that you have a look at this. And this is a contrast with Jimmy Carter's religion, his evangelical stance, which is, well, you better be good to the poor. And it's rather Mahatma Gandhi's talisman. Do think about the last man. Think about the last man. So this is a great president in many ways. At a concert for his birthday, he was asked if he had a request. And right away, this is just a few years back, right away, Jimmy Carter said, Imagine. He wanted to hear the song Imagine by John Lennon. And this was sung at his funeral. So, as Jonathan Friedland of The Guardian says, how will 2025 turn out? And in many ways, we can get a clue, as Jonathan Friedland says, from the life of Jimmy Carter. He gives us an unexpected clue, which is you don't know what to expect. the seeds that you plant may turn out to be very different than what people thought of you at the time. Great man in many different ways, Jimmy Carter, and my goodness, we're all so lucky to have had him in the world, as well as him supporting you too, Ananta, with your work. So I'll stop here. Certainly welcome any comments or questions.
Thank you so much, David. It was a really good presentation. And when he passed away, I was reading a newspaper. He was visited many times, but after emergency, he visited in India, and he visited a place in Haryana. And in Haryana, the village was named uh, Katarpuri, in his honor during his visit to the country in 1978. And, uh, he was first uh, mm, president who visited after the removal of the emergency and the victory of the Janata Party in 1977. And in his address to the parliament, he spoke against authoritarianism. He spoke against, the totalitarian regime. So he was very kind of courage he has. I was remembering one of his quote when he said that we cannot be both the world's leading champion of peace and the world's leading supplier of the weapons of war. So this kind of honesty, integrity he has, he can represent a global leadership. So, and it is always said that, what Plato says, judge the people with power. So having so powerful position and having that much that degree of humility is something which is lessons for all of us who understand politics and leadership in that context. So now I request respected participant to share their reflections. May I invite Dr. Gyan and then followed by Susri Appa. Yes, Dr. Gyan Luigi.
Yes. Thank you very much. It was both interventions were very interesting. In this moment, I have no particular question. Perhaps there could be a reflection, but I can guess that these would imply a webinar, an autonomous webinar about the difference between Carter's position on religion and the position of, for instance, the Christian Coalition, the silent majority of Jerry Falwell, for instance. This is very complex. I read something about the argument, but it is really a huge subject because, of course, it involves not only Jimmy Carter. Of course, it involves very much Jimmy Carter because the discussion between the within the presidency of Carter, also before that is, it involves a very great discussion already at the age of Bill Graham, if I'm not mistaken. There is buttressing of Nixon, and then the first doubt in at least a part of the Christian movement as regards the due to the Vietnam War. That is, I think, mostly in the second presidency of Nixon, and then during the presidency of Gerald Ford, there is, so to speak, a certain turbulence within the Christian churches, and there is a first creative vision, as far as I remembered. And then within the presidency of Carter, there is a huge debate. There is immediately, if I am not mistaken, so a kind of indifference from the, so to speak, from uh, the um, the Christians, the silent majority of Jerry Falwell. Then, when there was always more and more approaching the candidature of Ronald Reagan, there was a clear sustaining of Jerry Falwell for Ronald Reagan. And mutually, that is because there is a famous speech of Ronald Reagan in which he says, "I do not know whether you are for me, but for sure I am for you." I can remember it is during the for in the year can be 79, perhaps 80 or 80 during the electoral campaign, but I am not sure. And anyway, this is sociologically this debate within the Christian churches is very interesting. I personally have the impression, but of course, as I said, the argument is a huge subject that there was a really rigid and prompt sustaining and practicing of Jerry Falwell for Reagan, but on the other hand, what could be also a guilty of the other churches were not so ready to buttress Jimmy Carter in his efforts and in his different interpretation of Christianity and of the message of Christianity. I think that so see now there are, well, guilty is perhaps too much, but there were some faults in some part of the Christian churches to counteract the so rigid, so strong buttressing of Jerry Falwell and of all what Jerry Falwell meant in the United States of that time for Ronald Reagan. Because, well, there were, for instance, I heard in the past, now not so much, but I heard in the past many speeches of Jerry Falwell, and it was impressive, as I said, for instance, immediately after Ronald Reagan elections, he said something like this, said, we have now a president, and he spoke in 1981, who has promised us to be again the first nuclear power in the world. And this is, well, something that you can expect for in the military circles, of course, you can expect in the Secret Service, but said by a minister of Christianity is something which leaves me at least a little bit perplexed. And I always saw this clear position of Jerry Falwell for Ronald Reagan, but I have the impression that the position of other churches, which were next to Jimmy Carter's interpretation of Christianity and of solidarity, and of course of the fight against poverty, for instance, that these positions were not so warm, so to speak. I always had this impression. Perhaps it is false. Anyway, as I said, there are very many themes which are connected to Jimmy Carter, of course, and therefore, well, now they cannot be developed. Perhaps in the future there could be occasion for further discussion. Anyway, I thank you very much. It was very interesting. Thank you. Thank you.
Those are important comments, Gian. Thank you very much for that. And the Christian church in America used to be a main what we called mainline or mainstream churches: Methodist, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Congregationalists, and then after Jerry Falwell and Jimmy Carter, the larger number of people were following the Baptists and the evangelicals. Now we have a movement which is even further to the right. And again, the article that the link to the article I posted from the Atlantic magazine, this is the Dominion movement, where these Christians think that everyone in the United States should either follow Christianity or be following the devil. And it's unbelievable to me in this 21st century that we still have a movement like this, but the movement is very strong. And they have supported Donald Trump very strongly too, although he's not a very religious person, of course. So yeah, thank you for your comments. So, any other comments from anyone?
Thank you, David. I was just also thinking about a challenge during Carter's presidency, the high rate of inflation. What was the reason for that? And that also was not a very good factor with President Carter, which might have played a role.
Sure.
And in the last election, we also find that this was an issue. And why is that? If we compare, President Biden, we should have a separate discussion on his work, but he took so much long-term initiatives and on sensitivity to the poor, to climate question. But why the economy became a difficult issue? Why inflation also came during President Biden's time? Secondly, as you are in East Asia, and I forgot to mention, as part of his human rights work, especially in Korea, in South Korea, the Gwangju, the democratic rebellion, revolution that happened in Gwangju. And it happened, President Carter was the president, but it seems that, President Carter possibly didn't support the democratic, revolution there, possibly, and then the military dictator in Korea was, as much supported as any other.
Certainly, it is the case that the United States has supported dictators throughout, the history of the United States. And as far as the inflation goes, it's remarkable. I think people, ordinary people, are very much affected by inflation. And at the same time, the stock market is stronger than it's ever been. So there's some real contradictions here in what's happening, for sure. But why did people vote for Trump? It's an interesting question. I think there's a great mistrust of politicians in general. And so people think, well, if we're going to vote for anybody, let's vote for someone who's an outsider. Well, of course, he's not necessarily an outsider, but again, the role of the media and the social media and the creation of images is so powerful, and we should really critically look at those. Carter's presidency is a good example of that.
Yes, Susriyappa.
Yeah, thank you, Ranveer ji. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. So thank you, Ranveer ji. Thank you, Professor David. Very nice presentation indeed. Very thought-provoking. Just few reflections, not exactly questions. Completely agree. It is on few of the points that Jimmy Carter was probably one of the most, I would think, from the economic and from the I have read less of his work on faith and philosophy, poetry, but from the economic policy, which we were reading during our preschool days, point of view, yes, we think he was, I don't know if I call misunderstood, but definitely less understood president, uh, United States ever had. Coming to from the economics, coming to Ananthabhai's question, the high inflation during his time was perhaps triggered, or rather was a triggering effect of the oil crisis,
Yeah.
which was faced by the world in the early, 70s. So that was one of the key reasons, a key factor which had played. So to say, so it won't be wrong to say it was more of a systemic issue than uh, his policy failure. But yeah, perhaps he had to, like any leader, pay the price for it in the next election. Uh, but then, I think he had also done from those few of the things which were really ahead of his time. One is he was one of the early advocates of renewable energy.
Yes.
We were doing a research on on the energy sector, world energy sector, and its history. And I actually posed a question to the chairman of infrastructure development company, that how is it that the renewable energy, after being invented for almost more than a century, not taken off in the world. And that's how the discussion came into light, that you know uh, almost half century back, he had Jimmy Carter, who supposedly the first world leader who had a very vocally and very persistently advocating that uh, not only during his presidency, but even after his office. Yes, so definitely, which goes to say that uh, these are some of the things that he had problem, and these are the things which are being discussed during the World Summit and among the world leaders even now, that was definitely ahead of his time in many ways and many counters. Coming to his philosophy, faith, I have limited knowledge. Especially, he was also a good poet. He has a book of poems. That's one area I have not read. I haven't explored. I would request if Professor Dravid can, speak on that or introduce us to that. I don't know if he has already spoken, Professor David. In between for a few minutes, I lost the connection. So,
I did
so
not
if,
share, Dr. Sushri,
yeah,
about his
yeah,
poetry, but thank you for
yeah,
bringing that up because I think that's important. It's hard to
yeah,
imagine Donald
yeah.
Trump being a poet, for example. No, but Jimmy Carter, yeah, it was great. He was a visionary. He was a visionary.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you there.
No, no. That was rather for you to take on from there, in case you would like to share more about his poetry and maybe faith and philosophy.
I would love to do that, but I think we maybe we'll hear about others too. But faith and philosophy and poetry, wow, what more could you ask for with a former leader? I think about the leaders of India. How many of them, faith and philosophy and poetry? Well, perhaps Nehruji might have been
And
doing such things.
the poet Prime Minister Bajpayee, of course,
Oh
who
yeah, and
was
Vajpayee, yeah, who
Atal Bihari.
united the country in a lot of ways. Interesting Prime Minister Vajpayee. Yeah, indeed. But it gives us reflections on leadership for sure. I'll have to locate, a proper poem, an appropriate poem. but certainly it was about his faith and also about his courage. And he put peace at the center. I'm reminded of the work again of P.V. Rajgopal and Jill Harris at Ekta Parishad and Jai Jagat folks, and of course the recent recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize, the Hidankyo, the Japanese atomic bomb survivors. We need to give more attention to peace in the world in general. And this was a reminder that Carter gave to us all the time. He kept beating that drum. It was very important. I'll have to
Thank
look.
you. Thanks, Dr. Maru. Maru Bhai, over to you.
Yes, yes. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to comment and appreciate the point on this politics and poetry. I think I am reminded of a beautiful statement that the greatest tragedy of 20th century is that every problem is formulated in political terms. Now the point is poetry has been put on the margins, and that is one of the tragic, and world wars and all those conflicts and so many can be ultimately attributed to lack of poetic spirit in statesmen. I think the difference between statesman and a politician is statesman must have something of the poetic self in him. So we wish there should be a necessary qualification for politicians before qualifying for elections, that they should be taught poetry. So that would help a lot. And then if we could trace some of the best presidents of US and in India, we can see those who have the best record have been good writers. About Churchill, we can have differences, but at the end of the day, literature has been seen as a humanizing force. I just wanted to that someday we should have a focus. We should have focus on poetry and this statesmanship, and then I think this would bring more balance. And I am so happy to listen to the presentation. Thank you.
I request Miniti ji to share some of her reflections, and we'll end.
Thank you. Actually, for me, it was enlightening to know about the different aspect of the late president. So, and I'm very happy that in this discussion, one more nice theme has come up, like Maruf Bhai suggested now, statesmanship and poetics. I mean, when Shushriopa was telling also, I was thinking now that I don't know, he's the former leader, I think, in Kumar Vishwas also do the poetry. That will be, and one more line to that thing, when poetry cannot be taught, in my opinion. It should be spontaneous, and probably once you are into poetry, you will realize more what you used to say, the authenticity of the feelings, and you will go into the poetics. That is what is my opinion. I have one query. Anantbhai had one slide, a call to action, women and religion. Could you talk a little more about it? So that is what I would like to ask. Thank you.
Yes, Ananta.
Thank you, Minati. I meant a call to action, politics and religion. That said, that Jimmy Carter way of the religious was very, very subtle, very respectful, and like, the toxic masculinity that comes with the contemporary Christian fundamentalism and politics. That is not there in Jimmy Carter and that stream of religiosity and Christianity. It is very gender sensitive, and they do not believe in putting women in the kitchen, and also on the abortion question. All this thing is not there in Jimmy Carter and many Christian streams that continue the social action work. And another important issue in America is immigration. Way back then, when I came to the USA in 1986, at that time, religious groups played a very important role in providing sanctuary to the migrants, to the refugees, political refugees from Central America, in a way exacerbated by the politics of Ronald Reagan. So the sanctuary movement was very powerful. So all this, therefore, Jimmy Carter and religious leaders and that kind of Christian stream was very much respectful of beautiful gender relations, not suffering from toxic masculinity and a kind of macho aggression, and also very open to the refugees.
Okay, do we have time in the 2 minutes to, I wanted to ask Professor David this. Do we have time? So, I was just asking, that less consumerism and the economic progress, how did it move? I don't know, I'm not able to frame my question. Both are a little bit contradictory for me. So, did he manage both smoothly?
I think the answer is no.
Okay.
And I think he had a higher set of goals and higher values in mind than is the base for the capitalist society that is the United States. I also think part of it is Americans, they're very much, I should say, because I am an American too, very much self-indulgent. We are not about making sacrifices. We want to be indulged. And Carter was speaking against that. And I think people took offense at that because, yeah, indeed, we are guilty of that. Whereas Reagan gave them permission to be selfish. So it's really a very unfortunate turn. But again, the role of the media was very, very big in all of this. And we can't miss that one, I think. I put into the chat, by the way, Jimmy Carter's poem for his wife, Rosalind. It's a very beautiful poem. And do have a look at that poem. Maybe you can save the chat and look at it later. But yeah, he was a visionary. He was ahead of his time. And those who are ahead of their time often are not listened to. Yeah, I think the answer to the question about the economy and the inflation and so on, yeah, but he was dealt a bad hand. There was, as I think Dr. Shushree mentioned and Gian and Maruf mentioned, wow, it's, we have to think about this all very carefully, what this all means. What kind of leader do we want? Seems like the Americans want a leader like Reagan or Trump. I feel personally quite alienated from that. But I guess that's because I have appreciated the work of Mahatma Gandhi and P.V. Rajgopal and Anantabai and, people doing the good works. But that's not always what sells in the consumer-driven media, of course, and especially the social media now. So, yeah, we should have a session on this too. Yeah.
Thank you. Now I request Minitiji to offer vote of thanks.
You should have a last call if anyone else wants to talk anything. And 2 more people are there.
Yes, I can see Amir Bhai. Yes,
Yes.
Amir.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, uh, you talked about two phases of Carter's presidency. Like one was during the presidency, and the other phase was his post-presidency.
Hello, Amir Bhai, please put on your video, please.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
We have to be graced by your presence.
Okay. Am I visible now?
Assalamu
Um, So, if Carter's presidency marked the beginning of his leadership journey, his post presidency certainly defined its true essence. Like through
Yes.
his work with Habitat for Humanity, or his commitment to eradicating diseases, or his advocacy for human rights and democracy, Carter really expanded the very definition of leadership. He did
Yes.
not retreat into the comforts of private life like most of us do, but instead embraced a path of service that reflected his true values. This then challenges us to think about the responsibilities of former leaders, not only of former leaders, but of public office holders as well. Should public service be confined to the duration of office, or is it a lifelong calling to create a better world? Thank you.
Wonderful comments, Amir. Wow, it's so appropriate, especially about leadership. And it's a calling for all of us, I think. What sort of legacy do we want to leave ourselves? Each of us as well, not only great leaders, but all of us.
Thank you, Manitiji. And now I request you to.
Yeah. Thank you on behalf of